Max Wolfs and Lana Scott were the kind of couple that people in New York talked about with a little envy and admiration. Their lives seemed cut from the glossy pages of a magazine. He was a successful lawyer whose name flashed across the columns of the New York Law Journal. She is a gallery owner whose exhibitions have attracted Manhattan's elite. Max had the kind of charisma that didn't need big words. Tall, with an upright posture and a confident gait, he seemed to carry the entire weight of the legal world on his shoulders, and did it with ease. His face, with its clearly defined jawline, slightly stern but expressive steel-colored eyes and light gray hair at the temples, spoke of intelligence, experience, and inner discipline. His gaze showed the concentration of a man accustomed to winning. In an impeccable dark blue suit Frambrioni, tailored so perfectly that it seemed like an extension of his own skin, Max resembled a hero from a classic Hollywood film, and he had as much strength as he did style. Lana, on the other hand, had a soft, warm glow that drew the eye without the slightest effort. Slender, with delicate but confident movements, she could move as if the entire space belonged to her alone. Her long chestnut hair, usually pulled back into a casual but elegant bun, gave her the appearance of a woman immersed in the world of art, but not divorced from reality. Her large, dark amber eyes often lingered longer on paintings than on people, hiding a lively mind and subtle sensitivity. There was a soft musicality in her voice, and her laughter light, sincere, sometimes slightly mocking, made even the most sullen collectors smile. Every winter, their social life came alive as if on schedule. February charity auctions, galas, cocktail parties, all this was their stage, where they played the role of the perfect spouse. Their appearance at parties caused whispers in the crowd, as if they had stepped off the haute couture catwalk. Max, in his suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and perfect fit, was always calm and gallant, his slight half-smile saying, "I have everything under control." And Lana, in flowing dresses from Dior and Elie Saab that emphasized her refined figure, seemed to glide across the parquet, leaving behind a light scent of jasmine and iris. Their tango at the annual ball of the Foundation for Contemporary Art evoked signs of admiration, and their smiles at each other seemed so sincere that no one would dare to doubt their love. They were called the embodiment of the New York dream, stylish, successful, perfect, but only the most sensitive noticed how in rare moments their eyes did not meet. But behind that perfect picture was a subtle, almost invisible network of cracks. Their marriage, like any other, was a contract carefully crafted, backed by legal clauses. Lana had insisted on a strict prenuptial agreement, spelling it out in black and white. If one of the spouses cheated, that spouse would lose everything. "It's just insurance, Max," she had said then, signing the document in her lawyer's office, her voice soft but her eyes cold. "We'll never get to that, will we?" Max, with his usual lawyerly confidence, had just laughed. "Lana, we're a family. Who needs cheating?" he had replied, signing his name next to hers. At that moment, he had truly believed his words, but deep down, something had pricked him like a shadow of doubt, which he had immediately brushed aside. Here's an extended version of the scene with extra details, emotions, and nuances of the morning intimacy between Max and Lana. Their mornings began the same way, but there was something hauntingly intimate, almost sacred, about the ritual. Sunlight flooded the spacious bedroom in their Upper East Side penthouse, filtering through the heavy cream curtains to cast soft, golden wave-like reflections on the walls. The city had not yet fully awakened, and the silence, broken only by the occasional hum of traffic below, seemed like a world apart theirs, protected from the hustle and bustle. Lana was always the first to wake up. Her movements were smooth, almost cat-like, as she stretched out in bed, then leaned toward Max and touched his lips with light kisses. Without opening his eyes, he simply smiled at first, as if he knew she was there, and then slowly woke up, meeting her gaze warm, slightly sleepy, with a glint of something truly alive. The kitchen smelled of freshly roasted beans. At the marble counter, smooth and cool, they sat side by side as always. Lana in a loose cashmere wrap, her bare feet tucked under her, Max already in a shirt, his sleeves rolled up, tying his tie between sips of espresso. They rarely turned on the TV. Instead, they talked, slowly, with half smiles, sometimes interrupting each other. Morning conversations were their anchor. Today Lana was excited, almost electrified. Her voice sounded faster than usual, and her gestures were a little sharper. "You should see his new series, Max," she said, stirring her espresso with a small silver spoon, the pattern on the handle catching the light. "It's like he's cutting open your thoughts and turning them inside out. It's creepy and beautiful. I can't explain it in words." Max, having settled himself on a high chair, put aside at times, moved the cup and raised his eyebrows. "Creepy and beautiful. Sounds like you," he said with a half smile, casting a glance at her full of familiar irony, and winked. Lana rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched. She wanted to look annoyed, but deep down she was smiling he was still able to disarm her. "Don't suck up, wolves. Better get here at 6. I want you around when the reporters arrive. They love to take pictures of you, especially in those lawyer of the future suits." "Just because I'm standing next to you," he replied, rising to take his jacket and mechanically adjusting his cuffs. His movements were precise, almost ritualistic, like those of a man accustomed to controlling every detail. "You are a star, Lana. I am just your satellite in orbit." She laughed, tossing her dark hair back slightly, which looked especially soft this morning. Coming closer, she playfully slapped him on the shoulder. "Don't start, Max. You know it's not true." He stopped for a second, met her gaze, and, slightly lowering his voice, said, "Maybe I do, but I like to repeat it. Maybe someday you'll believe it." Lana didn't answer. She simply came closer, ran her fingers along the collar of his shirt, adjusting it slightly, as if casually. And that gesture, tiny but meaningful, was her answer. The clink of cups, the aroma of coffee, their reflections in the glass of huge windows, and the first rays of the sun over the rooftops of New York. All this was their personal moment of peace before another day began with camera flashes, calls, negotiations, crowds, and obligations. But for now, it's only them. But there was something elusive in her voice, a slight shadow that Max didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. At the gallery, Lana was in her element. She moved among the guests with the grace of a panther. Her words about the paintings sounded like poetry, and her light jokes made even the most prim collectors smile. Max stood a little to the side, holding a glass of champagne, and watched her. Her energy, her ability to turn the chaos of a social evening into an elegant spectacle, was mesmerizing. He was proud of her, but deep down he felt a slight pang, as if her brilliance sometimes eclipsed his own. "Mr. Wolfs, are you not dancing tonight?" asked an elderly lady in pearls, approaching him with a smile. "Only if Lana agrees," he replied, nodding towards his wife, who at that moment was explaining to the journalist the symbolism of the installation of broken mirrors. "You make a lovely couple," the lady remarked, and Max smiled, but his gaze lingered on Lana a little longer than usual. Something in her gestures, in the way she lightly touched the journalist's hand, seemed out of place. He shook his head, driving the thought away. Nonsense, he told himself. The evening ended in triumph. The exhibition received rave reviews, and Lana beamed as she accepted congratulations. Max stood nearby, playing the role of the perfect husband. He supported her with light comments, joked with the guests, but at some point he caught himself watching her movements, her smiles. She was flawless, but there was something too polished in this perfection, as if she were playing a role. Or was he imagining it? As they climbed into their two-door Cadillac, black as night, with a leather interior that smelled of luxury, Max felt the tension of the day begin to melt away. Jazz music poured from the speakers, and Sarah Vaughan's soft voice enveloped the cabin. Lana leaned back in her seat, kicking off her shoes, and looked up at him with a smile. "So, lawyer, how do you like my artist boy?" she asked, stretching like a cat. Max laughed as he started the engine. "Your boy is a genius, but damn, Lana, I didn't understand half of what he drew. Is that normal?" She chuckled, looking out the window. "It's art, Max. It's not meant to be understood. It's meant to be felt. Do you feel it?" he asked, and there was a note in his voice that he himself had not expected. Curiosity? Suspicion? Lana turned to him, Her eyes narrowed. "What's with that tone, Wolves?" She leaned closer, her tone playful but steely. "Are you jealous of my artists?" "Why?" He smiled, but it was a strained smile. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on in your head." "Oh, Max," Lana leaned back, her laugh light, but with a hint of mockery in it. "If you knew what was going on in my head, you'd run away." He laughed, but something in his chest tightened. Was this a joke? Or something more? He turned on the turn signal, and the Cadillac's headlights illuminated the dark street. "Thank you for everything, darling," he said as they pulled up to the house. His voice was warm, but there was a hint of weariness in it. Lana leaned down and kissed him on the cheek, her lips soft but cold. "You're welcome, dear," she replied, and there was something vaguely evasive in her tone. They rode up the elevator holding hands, but the silence between them was heavier than usual. In the apartment, Lana dropped her dress on the living room floor, leaving her in black silk lingerie, and headed to the bedroom. Max watched her go, and a thought was spinning in his head that he didn't want to let in. She was too perfect, too distant. He lay down next to her, but he couldn't sleep. In the darkness of the bedroom, he listened to her even breathing, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he didn't know what she was thinking. Their marriage had been built on trust, but that night, for the first time, Max wondered, what if trust was just an illusion? The morning in Max and Lana's penthouse began with deceptive silence, broken only by the distant hum of Manhattan outside the windows. Max woke up with the feeling of something heavy pressing down on his chest. The slight itch he had noticed the day before had now become a nagging discomfort, like a reminder of something he would rather forget. He lay in bed, looking at the empty space next to him. Lana had left for a business trip to Boston to personally supervise the hanging of paintings before the arrival of the London reviewers. Her absence, usually accepted as part of their busy lives, today felt like a betrayal. Max threw off the covers and stood up, trying to push away the anxiety that had already begun to seep into his thoughts. He dressed with his usual method: a snow-white shirt, a dark gray suit, a tie with a knot honed by years of practice and almost mechanical confidence. Every movement was measured, precise, like a surgeon accustomed to the precision and silence of the operating room. But today there was neither strength nor meaning in these gestures, only a dry, almost irritated mechanic. The coffee he brewed was unexpectedly bitter. Max looked at the packaging, the same brand as always, Jamaican Blue Mountain, his favorite variety. But the taste seemed alien to him, as if someone had replaced the beans. He raised the cup to his lips again, wincing not from the taste, but from the internal sediment, which was becoming heavier with each passing second. He stood by the picture window, looking out over the skyscrapers of the Upper East Side, their glass facades catching the morning sun. It was a landscape he had long been accustomed to, a symbol of stability, power, control. But today it felt uncomfortably empty. Max tried to remember when it all went wrong. Something seemed to shift, to crack not loudly, not sharply, but with that dull sound that foretells a collapse. His thoughts, as if despite him, kept returning to that meeting in Halifax 3 weeks ago. It had all seemed harmless then. An evening after a conference, a dimly lit bar, jazz music in the background. And Gala, a young scientist with a soft voice, lively eyes, and a sharp but gentle sense of humor. Her words were light but tenacious, clinging to him not for their length, but for their meaning. They talked about books, about free thinking, about the boundaries between the personal and the professional. Max kept telling himself that it was just a conversation, just a meeting, just a cocktail, but inside there was an itch. Something remained in her, something elusive that he couldn't or wouldn't let go. He found himself rereading the note Lana had left on the kitchen counter for the third time. "I'll be back tomorrow, love. L." The lines were written in her neat, almost schoolgirl handwriting, slightly tilted to the right. He knew this handwriting by heart. Each letter was like a fingerprint. But now he read between the lines, trying to catch what might not be there. Why, "I'll be back tomorrow," and not "see you soon." Why just "I love you," and not kisses or waiting? They didn't have time to have breakfast together. Lana left at dawn, almost on tiptoe, as if she wanted to avoid a conversation. Their farewell was quick a light kiss at the door, her hair, smelling of jasmine, brushing his cheek, and a quiet, "I'll call you this evening," thrown out as they ran. At the time, it seemed ordinary, now distant, almost formal. And then, like a flash in the darkness, a thought struck my head. But what if he's not the only one who doubts? What if she has someone, or something? He shook his head, as if he wanted to shake these thoughts out like raindrops. Tension squeezed his chest, and he, looking at his reflection in the mirror fit, stylish, collected, said out loud, "You're a lawyer, Max. Pull yourself together. Facts, not emotions." But even his voice, usually clear and confident, now sounded muffled, and in the depths of his gaze, a shadow flashed, not fear, no doubt. The same one that slowly but persistently corrodes even the strongest walls. He had made an appointment for an urgent checkup at a private clinic on Fifth Avenue the night before. As a man accustomed to monitoring everything from his clients' contracts to the smallest details of his life, Max had assumed that a quick test would set the record straight. He wasn't one to panic over trivial matters. But in the taxi on the way to the clinic, his fingers fiddled nervously with his watch strap, his thoughts racing. What if this wasn't a mistake? What if it was true? The clinic greeted him with sterile whiteness and the smell of antiseptic. The cleanliness here was almost frightening, like a museum where the exhibits are human destinies. The light was bright, but cold, like a winter day without sun. The floors sparkled, the corridors were silent, only the occasional footsteps and the rustle of paper broke the silence. Max walked past a row of closed doors with signs and numbers, behind which their own little dramas were taking place. He was accompanied by an assistant, a young guy in a blue robe with a perfectly shaven face and an empty, professional expression. He did not say a word, only gestured towards the office with the mat sign. Dr. E. Rice. Inside, everything was as Max had expected. A leather chair, a glass table, neatly arranged files, and the same sterile silence. He sat up, his back straight, as if he were being interrogated. His gaze slid over the interior in such places he felt out of place, as if he had entered someone else's life. He clenched his fingers, mechanically twisting his wedding ring, a subtle gesture that gave away everything. Tension, anticipation, anxiety. A minute later, the door opened. The doctor entered, an elderly man with thinning hair and wearing a gray corduroy jacket over a white coat. His face was friendly but tired, like that of a man who had seen too much pain in a day. "Mr. Wolf's, the results are in," he said, coming closer. His voice was even measured, as if he was trying not to give his words either unnecessary heaviness or comfort. He handed Max a thin envelope, neatly sealed, without marks or headings, as if inside were not papers, but fate. "You can take a look." Max took it slowly. The envelope felt heavy, though it weighed less than the notepaper. His fingers trembled. He looked at it as if he hoped to read the answer through the paper before he opened it, before he knew. The seconds dragged on viscous, and until he tore the edge, only one thought was spinning in his head. If this is true, what next? Max took the envelope, but was in no hurry to open it. His fingers hovered over the edge of the paper, as if he could put off the moment of truth. His heart was beating faster than he would like to admit. Finally, he tore open the envelope, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. The black letters on the white background hit him like a death sentence. Chlamydia, a sexually transmitted infection, has been detected. The word chlamydia stood before his eyes like an accusation. Max reread the line 3 times, as if hoping the letters would form a different word. "Chlamydia?" he asked again, looking up at the doctor. His voice wavered, revealing everything he had tried in vain to hide behind a cold mask of confidence. His eyebrows drew together slightly, his fingers still clutching the envelope, as if the paper could provide an explanation. The doctor nodded. His face remained impassive, not cold, but not sympathetic either. Just a professional calm, honed by years of working with frightened, shocked, or, conversely, overly indifferent patients. "Yes, Mr. Wolf's. It's a fairly common infection," he began, emphasizing the word common, as if he was trying to immediately remove the feeling of guilt. But fortunately, it responds well to treatment. You came in time. We will prescribe a course of antibiotics. 2 weeks will be enough. The main thing is to tell your partner to avoid reinfection. To a partner, Max almost chuckled, but instead of laughter, it came out as a muffled sound. Something between irony and confusion. His throat went dry. He looked away, as if trying to escape the question itself. An image of Lana flashed before his mind's eye, her perfect smile at the opening of the exhibition, her voice echoing between the columns of the gallery, her hand on his chest as she straightened his tie before leaving. Everything was as usual. Everything was too perfect. Is it really her? The thought whispered. But then, as if in response, another, or maybe he himself, Gala. Her name came back like a burn. Her voice, her hand on his shoulder that last night in the bar. No, no, there was nothing there, at least physically, or... Max shook his head, driving it away like an annoying fly. Yes, it is important, the doctor continued, not noticing how his patient's inner world was collapsing under this even voice. If you have a regular partner, she also needs to be examined. This is a standard procedure. And of course, sexual intercourse is not recommended until the treatment is completed. Max nodded, but there was no awareness in his movement, only automatism. He sat there like a puppet whose thin strings had been cut. Tell Lana? How? When? And what should I say? You infected me, or get tested because it might be my fault. This illness, such a trifle compared to everything he had in life, suddenly became the point where the rift between them could turn into an abyss. Max nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He thanked the doctor, walked out of the office, and stood in the empty hallway. His reflection in the glass door looked alien pale face, tight lips, eyes full of questions. Max Wolfs, a lawyer who had handled multi-million-dollar deals and won cases that had seemed hopeless, was now faced with a fact he couldn't explain. Chlamydia. The word sounded like a mockery, like a blow to his ego. But worst of all, the thought was beginning to form in his head. Lana. If she cheated, that changed everything. In the taxi on the way to the office, Max was silent, looking out the window. The driver said something about traffic, but the words flew past him. Max replayed their marriage in his head, every moment, every smile from Lana. Her business trips, her late nights at the gallery, her easy jokes that now seemed ambiguous. He remembered her touching that journalist's arm at the exhibition, her laugh a little louder than it should have been. Or was it his imagination? He clenched his fists, feeling anger mingle with pain. If Lana broke their contract, she would lose everything. The house, the gallery, their shared assets. As a lawyer, he knew how to pull it off. But the idea that their marriage, their perfect life, could be a lie cut deeper than he expected. In the office, Max tried to keep his composure. His colleague, Emily, a young partner at the firm, noticed his tension but attributed it to fatigue. "Max, are you okay?" she asked, handing him a cup of coffee during their lunch break. "You look like you lost a case." "It's okay," he replied, forcing a smile. "Just a lot of work." "Well, you're Max Wolf's," she winked. "You always get out of it." He nodded, but her words only added to his inner chaos. To wriggle out. Yes, he knew how to do that. And now he would wriggle out. If Lana was guilty, he would use it. He could already see the lawsuit, the divorce proceedings, her face when she realized she had lost everything. But deep down, he was afraid. Not that she would betray him, but the truth might be more complicated. Lana called in the evening. Her voice on the phone was warm, almost playful, like before, as if nothing had changed. "Max, did you miss me?" she asked, and he could almost see her smile, that light, enveloping manner of speaking with which she always broke the ice of any conversation. "I'm fighting with these Brits here. They want me to redo everything. Can you imagine? Even the lighting is not good enough. Too expressive, they say." "Sounds like war," he replied, smiling reservedly. He tried to keep his voice even familiar. The same timbre, the same pauses. Like a lawyer in court, reading the testimony, knowing that there is a catch in it. "When will you be back?" "Tomorrow by lunchtime." Do you want to meet me at the airport? Her voice was light, almost playful, almost the same as before, and this want sounded like an invitation to normality, like a chance to get everything back. Certainly, he said, and the words sounded soft, but his fingers at that moment were gripping the phone so tightly that his knuckles were white. His heart was pounding dully, as if everything inside him was arguing with what he had said. Lana, are we okay? There was a pause on the other end of the line. It lasted less than a second, but it was long enough to make Max's insides clench. He heard her take a breath, barely noticeable, but real. And silence. Silence in which words were not hidden, but meanings were hidden. Of course, darling, she finally said. The voice was still soft, calm, almost gentle, but there was a shadow in it, a shadow that Max had already learned to hear, like a lawyer learning to tell from the look of a witness what he is not telling them. Why do you ask? He closed his eyes. Just like that he lied, and the lie, so simple, sounded especially hard. He's probably tired. Rest easy, lawyer, she said, and he heard her smile. I'll be home soon, love. Me too, he answered. The words flew from his lips automatically, like a familiar formula. But at that very second, he realized that they were ringing inside him with emptiness, like an echo in an empty hall. He hung up and stared at his laptop, where the file with the test results was still open. Chlamydia, the word that now defined his life. He knew he had to talk to Lana, but not like this, not right away. He had to be sure. And if she was guilty, he wouldn't just divorce her. He would destroy her. As a lawyer, he knew how to do that. But as a husband, he was afraid the truth would destroy not only her, but him too. For 2 days after his visit to the doctor, Max had been living in a strange state, as if he were balancing on the edge of an abyss where every step could be his last. His mind, accustomed to sorting out complex corporate matters, was now tangled in its own suspicions. He sifted through the memories of his marriage to Lana like old photographs, trying to find a crack, a hint, something he might have missed. Her smiles, her light touches, her habit of staying late at the gallery, all of this, once part of their perfect life, now seemed like evidence. But at the same time, his own guilt was a thorn in his side. The gala, that night in Halifax, her laughter, her question, "You don't regret anything, do you?" All of it surfaced in his memory like an accusation. He had given her a ring, an expensive one, a sapphire, as a gesture that was supposed to remain a secret. But now that secret could cost him everything. Max sat in his office on 42nd Street, looking out over the city skyline, but the skyscrapers that usually inspired him seemed cold and indifferent today. On his desk lay the prenuptial agreement he had taken out of his safe that morning. His fingers slid over the lines where it was written in black and white. Infidelity by one of the spouses would deprive him of all assets. It had been Lana's idea, her insurance, as she had said. He had agreed then, without thinking, confident that their marriage was indestructible. Now the document had become his weapon or trap. If Lana was guilty, he would win everything. But if he was guilty, Max pushed the thought away. He could not afford weakness. His suspicions about Lana grew with each passing hour, like an invisible fog filling every crevice of his consciousness. They no longer simply disturbed him. They enveloped his every thought, every glance, every memory. He recalled her recent business trip to Boston, apparently only for 2 days, but there had been something strange in her voice then. She had seemed tired, yes, but there was a different intonation to that tiredness, a little distant, as if she were somewhere much further than the 4-hour drive from New York. He remembered how her calls became shorter and shorter, how she abruptly ended the conversation, citing a meeting, an urgent call, or tiredness. How she stopped writing before bed, something that had once been their ritual, almost a prayer before the night. And how, upon returning, she dove straight into work without saying a word about the trip. No description of the hotel, no stories about the people. Just a dry, "Everything went great." He wasn't paranoid. At least, he wasn't. But now, after the diagnosis, after the folder of lab results, after looking in the mirror and no longer recognizing himself, everything had changed. He checked her phone that night. carefully, almost reverently, as if it were a fragile vessel that could be broken by a careless touch. She slept next to him, calmly, breathing evenly, her hand clenched on the edge of the pillow. He felt like a thief in his own home, but he justified it. I need to know. Nothing. The phone was clean, as if it had been thoroughly washed. Only business letters, negotiations with artists, correspondence with a PR manager, thanks from guests who attended the opening of the exhibition. A few memes from a friend, funny, light, without subtext. Even in the photo roll, the same faces, familiar places, art, halls, angles. No shadows, no secrets. But it was the lack of evidence that worried him most. Because he knew Lana was smart, cautious. She had a photographic memory and an almost maniacal sense of order. If Shiotelto hides something, she would hide it, without a single trace. Or is he wrong after all? Maybe he's just looking for something that doesn't exist. This thought gnawed at him from within. Her calm now seemed suspicious, her tenderness rehearsed. Even the silence at dinner, not just fatigue, but a secret signal. He began to catch a double bottom in every intonation, to look for meaning in every look, to weigh pauses in conversation. He no longer knew what was reality and what was his fear. Lana returned home in the evening. Her suitcase stood by the door, like a temporary witness to her absence, and she herself, in a black cashmere sweater, skinny jeans, and with a slight weariness in her movements, looked as always elegant, collected, with that very detached beauty that made her unattainable in the eyes of others. Only today Max looked at her differently. He was waiting for her in the living room, standing by the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. The light from the floor lamp fell on his face, casting a sharp profile on the wall. He had already made his decision. Doubts burned in the fire of that pause she had made on the phone. "Lana," he began. His voice was low, calm, but inside it there was metal. "We need to talk." She raised an eyebrow as she took off her coat. Her movements were still fluid, but there was a wariness to them now. Like an actress who senses that the stage has changed and the audience is no longer on her side. "Wow, Max, you sound like you're in court," she said, trying to smile, but the smile did not reach her eyes. They, on the contrary, looked at him attentively, almost penetratingly. "What's happened?" He pointed to the sofa. Lana sat down, crossing her arms, as if instinctively defending herself. Max put a piece of paper on the table, the results of the analysis, carefully taken out of the folder. "I was examined by a doctor. I have chlamydia." He paused. Not for effect, but he simply couldn't continue right away. "It's only sexually transmitted, Lana. I want to know where it came from." Her face froze. He saw her hold her breath, her fingers trembling slightly, but she quickly pulled herself together. "Max," she said slowly, as if each word were a seam holding together a crack, "do you seriously think that I could be with someone?" Her voice wavered, but she quickly pulled herself together. Resentment flashed in her eyes, then turned to rage. "Is this an accusation?" "I don't blame." He lied. In fact, he was accused. He would like not to accuse, but his voice already sounded like a verdict. "I just want to understand. We're married, Lana. We promised each other honesty. If you were with someone, if I was with someone," she interrupted. Her voice became cold as a blade. "And you, Max? Where were you while I was wandering around galleries and meeting those prim British guys?" She leaned closer, and he felt her gaze pierce him like a needle. "Are you sure it's me who should explain?" Max swallowed, his heart clenching. Her question had hit the mark. He hadn't expected a counterattack. But he'd already started, and he couldn't stop. "I love you, Lana," he said, almost pleadingly, trying to return the conversation to where there was still some ground left. "And I want to believe that you're not lying to me. But I need facts. I can't just pretend that nothing happened." She laughed, dryly and joylessly. "Facts? You sound like a lawyer, not a husband," she hissed. "You don't need feelings, you need a document with a signature, preferably with a confession. Do you want me to sign right here?" She stood up abruptly, as if she could no longer bear the tightness of the sofa. Her steps on the floor were quick, nervous. "Do you really think I could risk everything?" Our marriage, our lives, my gallery, your trust. She turned to him, and there was pain in her eyes, real pain, not theatrical pain. But her voice remained sharp. And you, Max, have you always been so honest? Have you ever had conversations that lasted until midnight? Innocent meetings outside the city? He tensed, and that moment of betrayal inside him not done, but possible flared like a burn. She felt it. I don't want to say anything, she continued, looking at him from a distance that already seemed like an abyss. Figure it out yourself. And she was gone. She simply turned and disappeared through the bedroom door, leaving him in the dim light, the whiskey, and the paper with his diagnosis. Max remained in the living room, feeling the air in the room grow thicker, as if the truth was no longer a question, but a sentence they both tried to postpone, but could no longer undo. This conversation only added fuel to the fire. Max realized that words were not enough. He needed evidence, and he knew how to get it. The next day, after a cold, anxious morning, Max contacted Ray Carter, a private investigator with whom his law firm worked on particularly sensitive cases: disappearances, blackmail, high-level marital conflicts. Ray was the kind of man who seemed invisible in a crowd, but saw everything. Short, with a rounded belly and a perpetually wrinkled jacket, he had a look that made you want to look away, too penetrating, too tenacious. They met in a small cafe on the edge of Soho, a place Max would hardly have walked into without a reason. Scruffy wooden tables, slightly bitter coffee, and jazz playing from crackling speakers. There was definitely no one from his circle here. That was exactly what he needed. Ray was already sitting by the window, latte and notepad in hand. He looked up as Max walked in and gestured for him to sit across from him. Max Wolf's himself, he muttered, putting the cigarette back into the pack, which he had not managed to take out. You know, of course, that if a lawyer comes to me for something other than work, it means the matter is serious. Max sat down on a hard chair, placed a cup of black coffee in front of him, and was silent for a second, as if gathering his courage. I need you to keep an eye on my wife, he said finally. His voice was even, but his gaze was fixed on the cup, not on Ray's eyes. Lana Scott, I want to know everything: who she dates, where she goes, what she talks about. Everything, down to the last detail. Ray put his pen down for a moment, raising his eyebrows. Wife, then? He chuckled. You are not the first, and not the last. He opened a tattered notebook and began to write something down in short notes. What exactly are we looking for? A lover? Money? Something criminal? Or just something wrong? Max winced, not because of the words, but because he was hearing it out loud for the first time. Maybe. I'm not sure, but I have reasons to doubt. Behavior. Little things. Pauses in conversation. A business trip after which she was different. And I got sick. He didn't elaborate. Ray nodded, understanding more than Max would have liked. Got it. Signals that can't always be explained. Suspicions that seem to be unconfirmed, but don't go away, right? He took a sip of coffee. Facts are my job, Max. I'm not a psychologist, not a judge. I just collect what I have. Cameras, photos, route, correspondence, if I get there. Microphone optional. But I'll tell you right away, it's dirty. Always. And maybe you'll find out something you don't want to. Max finally looked up. I need answers. No guesses. No conjecture. Specifics. If I'm wrong, so be it. But if not, I need to know. Ray crossed his arms, leaned back in his chair, and just looked at him silently for a moment. You don't want to ruin everything for nothing. That's understandable. But believe me, I've seen people break even from the truth they asked for. So I'll ask you again, straight up. Are you sure you want to know this, Max? Without embellishment? Without filters? Max didn't answer right away. He slowly turned the cup, watching a drop of coffee trickle down the rim. I'm ready, he said finally. His voice sounded calm, but inside he was unsure, and they both knew it. Ray nodded, not arguing, not sympathizing, just a businesslike statement. Okay, send me her photo, car number, addresses where she hangs out most often, and Don't expect news too soon. The truth is, it doesn't always go according to schedule. Max nodded and stood up, leaving the bill under the cup. When he left the cafe, the air seemed heavier than when he entered. 2 days later, when Ray's message arrived via encrypted email, Max read it without blinking, as if every word could change the trajectory of his life. The report was brief, matter of fact, just as he had asked. But beneath the dryness, there was a pulsing, uneasy pulse between the lines. The subject spent the day according to her usual routine, from 10:15 to 1:40 p.m. work in the gallery, meeting with the artist, reviewing the exhibition, working with catalogs, 2 p.m. lunch with a friend at the Bar Pity restaurant on Madison Avenue, see photo. At 6:25 p.m. a short call from an unknown number, incoming. Immediately hung up. At 7:10 p.m. meeting at the Karen Bar. Duration 10 minutes. Interlocutor, a tall man, about 40 years old, European type, in an expensive coat, dark blue cashmere. The conversation is tense. Photo included. The face is difficult to see the angle of the shot, and the distance make identification difficult. Max sat in his office at a large walnut desk, piled high with files that now seemed useless. All his attention was focused on the screen, on the photo of Lana, recognizable from any angle, her silhouette in a light coat, her tense profile, her fingers clutching a glass, and the man, slightly in the shadows, an indistinguishable face, but in his posture, in the tilt of his head, in the way he looked at her, you could feel too much. Max pressed his lips together. Something hot was flaring up in his chest. Anger, jealousy, fear, or triumph. Yes, something like that. As if he was standing at a door behind which lay the answer, and almost holding the handle. Almost got it, he muttered, holding the photo closer. His heart was pounding, the pulsation in his temples became almost a ringing. But that moment collapsed like a house of cards when Gayla appeared in his mind. Not a memory, but a feeling. Her laughter. Her voice in the half-darkness of the bar. Her ring, thin and silver, on her ring finger. Her question, "Do you often talk like that to strangers, Max?" He didn't answer then, because it didn't seem important. Then, now it seemed. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if trying to exhale the part of him that was still defending Lana, or the part that was trying to justify itself. If Lana is guilty, he will use it. Will put a period. Will cut the thread. If not. He didn't know what would happen if he didn't, because then he would have to look in the mirror and ask himself questions, and he knew all too well that he could lie to others, but to himself worst of all. He instructed Ray to dig deeper, to set up hidden cameras in the gallery, to check her email, to intercept her calls. He knew this was a violation not just of the law, but of their marriage. But he couldn't stop. Suspicion was like poison in his mind. He had to know the truth. And if the truth was what he thought it was, Lana would pay. Max Wolfs had always prided himself on his ability to keep his cool. In the courtroom, under the spotlight and the gaze of the jury, he was unwavering. Every word was measured, every move precise, every pause calculated. There, amid the drama and accusations of others, he had been in control. But now, standing in his own Upper East Side living room, prenuptial agreement in hand, he felt his inner armor cracking. Everything that had stood for him was shaky. The contract was written in his handwriting, or rather, dictated by him. It had it all: protection, control, profit, a penthouse, a gallery, investments, insurance. Formulations that left no room for love, but plenty of room for consequences. He thought it was reasonable then. Now it was a weapon. Chlamydia. The word was like a nail driven into his mind. He repeated it in his head, as if trying to give it a meaning that made more sense than the truth. Not an accident. Not a mistake. It was proof. Or at least that's what he wanted to think. He held the contract not like a piece of paper, but like a grenade with the pin pulled ready to blow up everything if necessary. But inside, beneath this shell, where he still played the role of a cold strategist, doubt was stirring. What if he is to blame? Gayla. He hadn't touched her, hadn't crossed a physical line. But isn't loyalty betrayed before touching? Their conversations, her eyes, her shadow that hadn't left him even at night. He tried to push it away, but the thought had clung to him like a hook. He spent the morning in the office, but the work was crumbling like dry paper. Contracts, corporate disputes, client calls, it all seemed foreign. He closed his laptop earlier than usual and was left alone in the quiet of the office. Ray Carter's report was printed out on the desk. He read it for the second time, without a pencil in his hand, without analysis. He simply peered at the lines as if they could give him an answer. Late call from unknown number. Rejected. Meeting at the bar. Man, expensive cashmere. 10-minute conversation. Blurred photo. In the picture, Lana leans a little closer than necessary. Not intimately, but confidentially. Her shoulder is slightly turned toward the man. Her hand barely touches the glass, but her fingers are tense. Max knew body language. He read it like a text. She was nervous. He was dominant. She didn't pull away. The brain told me nothing specific, only hints, a shadow, but the heart whispered, that's enough already. He stood up and paced the room. His heart was beating dully, as if in the walls. He went to the bar, poured himself a single malt, took a sip, not tasting it. The evening was beginning to thicken outside the panoramic window. His face was reflected in the glass, tired, tense, with some strange hardness in his eyes. It's time to act. Max placed the contract on the table, neatly, like evidence in court. He was not going to wait any longer. If Lana cheats, he will use it, and he will come out the winner. If she doesn't. He exhaled slowly. If she didn't, he would have to admit that it wasn't someone else who had ruined everything. It was him. Sure, here's an extended excerpt with enhanced dialogue and nuance to convey the psychological tension, legal precision, and inner hesitation of the characters. Okay, I'll prepare the documents to file a claim, Elizabeth said, making a note on her pad in neat, controlled handwriting. Then she looked up, peering at Max over her thin glasses. But I advise you to be careful, Mr. Wolfs. Very careful. Max frowned and leaned back a little. Do you doubt that I am right? I have no doubt, I warn you, she answered dryly. The court does not require emotions, but facts. Suspicions, guesses, even a medical certificate, such as this one. She nodded at the paper lying in front of her, maybe part of the picture, but not definitive proof. I told you, I'm working on it. His voice became firmer. I am a private detective. He already has photos, meetings, calls. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. So you are keeping an eye on your wife? Max nodded. Yes, because no one else will tell me the truth, and because I have the right to do so. You have the right to defend yourself, she emphasized. But spying is not always legal, especially if it involves intruding into personal correspondence, wiretapping, or hidden filming. Any evidence obtained in violation of the law will be immediately rejected by the court. Moreover, it can turn against you. He clenched his jaw, drumming his fingers on the table. What do you suggest? Wait until everything collapses and pretend nothing happened. I suggest we act in cold blood, just the way you know how, Elizabeth answered calmly. You're a lawyer, Mr. Wolfs. You must understand how delicate this game is, and if you get it wrong... I'm not mistaken, he interrupted, but there was weariness in his voice. I know there's something broken between us, and I know she's hiding something. Knowing is one thing, proving is another, Elizabeth noticed and looked at him more closely. Are you sure you're ready to go through this? The trial, the publicity, the public hearings, the interrogations. You'll be questioned. Your wife will be questioned, and if even one detail comes to light that compromises you. Max froze. His hand gripped the edge of the table. He suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Are you hinting at Gala? He asked quietly. Elizabeth nodded slightly, not looking away. I'm not implying anything, but if you have one thing that could be interpreted as less than perfect behavior, believe me, your wife's lawyers will find it, and they will question your allegations. Divorce on the grounds of adultery is a war, Mr. Wolfs, not a fight. Max looked down, and for a moment the silence between them became thick as smoke. Do you still want to go down this path? She asked softly but firmly. He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, I want to, because I need to know the truth, even if it tears apart everything we had. Elizabeth nodded back, her face devoid of emotion, only respect for a decision that had not been taken lightly. Then we will begin, but I will repeat once again, not a single step without my consultation, not a single emotion without strategy. Max sighed, stood up from his chair, and carefully adjusted the cuffs of his shirt. Agreed, and thank you, Elizabeth. I need someone in this world to still play by the rules. She smiled faintly, almost tiredly. Don't expect justice, Mr. Wolfs. Expect preparation. Max walked out of the office, feeling the Manhattan morning air fill his lungs. The city was waking up. Taxis honked, people hurried along the sidewalks, and the sky over Broadway was pale pink with dawn. He paused, looking up at the skyscrapers, and told himself, legally, I'm right. But there was still a lingering sense of unease in his chest. He knew what he was doing, but he wasn't prepared for what was coming next. Lana returned home later than usual. Her steps were light, almost inaudible, but Max caught them as he sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey. On the table in front of him lay the marriage contract, next to it the medical certificate. He had deliberately left them in plain sight, like a chessboard before a decisive move. Lana entered, throwing her coat over the back of the sofa. Her gaze fell on the documents, and she froze. "Are you busy?" she asked, her voice soft, but with a slight tremor in it. Max looked up, his face unreadable. "You thought I'd leave without a fight?" he asked, pointing to the papers. "Read them." Lana walked up to the desk, her fingers touching the certificate. She read slowly, her face calm, but Max noticed how her lips tightened. "Chlamydia," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "And you think it's me?" "It's only sexually transmitted, Lana," Max said, his tone cold and lawyerly. "I've never been with anyone but you. Explain." She looked up, and there was so much pain in her gaze that Max doubted it for a second. But he immediately pushed the feeling away. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice growing louder. "Are you accusing me? After everything we've been through? After I built our life, our family, your damn reputation? Don't change the subject," he snapped. "I showed you the facts. I have an infection. Where did it come from, Lana?" She threw the certificate on the table, her hands shaking. "You can't just go and blame me," she almost screamed. "I didn't cheat on you, Max. Never. How dare you?" "Then explain," he said, standing up. "Because I don't see any other explanation. And if you can't, our marriage is over. I'm suing. Breach of contract. You know what that means." Lana laughed, but her laughter was bitter, almost hysterical. "Are you suing? Seriously, Maximilian?" She called him by his full name for the first time in a long time, and it sounded like a challenge. "You want to tear our lives apart because of some analysis? And you? Are you sure your closet is free of skeletons?" Max felt her words hit him where it hurt most. The gala, the ring, a night in Halifax, but he wasn't going to give up. "I'm clean, Lana," he lied, his voice firm. "And you? Are you willing to swear you haven't been with anyone else?" She fell silent, her eyes shining with tears, but she did not let them fall. "I won't make excuses," she said finally. "But if you're so sure it's me, let's retake the tests. Both of us, right now, and see which one of us is lying." Max froze. Her offer was unexpected, but he couldn't refuse. If she was bluffing, he would catch her. If not, he pushed the thought away. "Okay," he said. "Tomorrow, I'll organize it." The next day, they went to the clinic together. The tension between them was as tangible as an electric shock. They barely spoke as they sat in the sterile room, the nurse taking samples. Lana stared out the window, her face unreadable, but Max noticed her fingers fiddling nervously with the strap of her bag. He tried to remain calm, but inside he was seething. He could already see himself filing a lawsuit, her gallery passing into his hands, and him emerging victorious from this marriage. But somewhere deep inside, He was afraid the truth might be more complicated. We are not afraid to speak the truth, even when it breaks the heart. We are here to expose betrayal, lies, and double standards, just like what happened in the case of Max Wolf's and Lana Scott. This is not just a scandal. This is a reminder that every mask falls sooner or later. If you don't want to live in illusions, either like it, and even better, subscribe to always be on the side of justice. Because silence is the weapon of those who lie, and we are a force that speaks loudly. Max sat in his office, surrounded by glass, concrete, and silence, with only one sound, the rustling of paper as he opened two envelopes, one with his name on it, the other with Lana's name on it. He felt his heart beating treacherously in his chest, as if it was anticipating not just information, but a sentence. He already knew the first sheet almost by heart. Chlamydia, active form, onset of infection is estimated to be 2 to 3 weeks ago. He had expected this. He had already lived through this diagnosis, swallowed its bitterness, and turned it into determination. But the second document, its result, destroyed everything he had so carefully built. Chlamydia, latent form. The infection has signs of a previous infection, with an inactive course. Approximate time of infection later than in patient M. He read the report 3 times. He looked for inaccuracy, falsehood, a medical term that might hide an error. But the words were clear, impartial, stubborn. This meant one of two things. Or he infected her, or they are both from different people. He looked out the window, where New York was living its normal life. Cars, people, signals. And inside him, the ground was slipping away from under his feet. He reached for the phone with sudden abruptness. His fingers trembled as he dialed Lana's number. A thin beep. Her voice answered on the third ring. "Hello? Lana," he exhaled, breaking down. "I got the results. You have chlamydia too, but it's a latent form." He was silent for a split second. Explain. There was silence on the other end of the line. That thick silence in which you can even hear a person swallowing air. "What?" she finally said, hoarsely, as if her voice had cracked. "Are you kidding?" "I'm not kidding," he said harshly, pressing his palm into the table. "You are infected, but your form seems to be later than mine. So you..." He didn't finish. The words seemed too heavy to pronounce. "Who, Lana? Who was it?" "Max, I don't know what you're talking about." Her voice almost rose to a scream. "If I have it, it means I got it from you. I only slept with you, do you understand? With you." He clenched his teeth. Her words were like a hot needle, but not from the pain, from what suddenly became maybe that she is telling the truth. "You blame me," she continued, breathing heavily, "or maybe it's you, Max. Maybe you weren't as pure as you pretended to be, and now you're trying to blame it all on me." Max felt the blood rush to his face. Her accusation was a mirror, a reflection of his own guilt, which he did not want to think about. He stood up and walked around the office, trying to maintain control, but his voice wavered. "I'm suing, Lana." Pause. "Breach of contract? You know what that means." There was a new silence at the other end, but not from shock, from something else cold, hard. "Do whatever you want." Her voice was even, steely, without emotion. "But you're wrong, Max, and you'll regret it." The signal was cut off. He remained standing with the pipe in his hand, staring at the point. And suddenly he realized the truth for which he had fought so hard may have more than one face, and more than one price. She hung up, and Max sat in his office, staring at the test results. He knew he had to act. He had already contacted Elizabeth Crow and instructed her to prepare the lawsuit. But now, with this new information, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. If Lana was right, if he had infected her, then he had broken the contract, and then everything he had planned would come back to haunt him. He returned home that evening, but Lana had already left. There was a note on the table. "I'm at the hotel. Don't call." Max crumpled the paper, feeling rage and despair warring in his chest. He knew he had to continue. He had to prove her guilt. But deep down, he was afraid that the truth would destroy not only her, but himself as well. The Manhattan courtroom was thick with the scent of old leather and polished wood. mingled with the faintest hint of dust from the afternoon sun that streamed through the tall windows. The silence, broken only by the rustling of papers and the muffled footsteps of the clerks, was tangible, as if the very air were charged with the tension of the battle to come. The judge, a distinguished man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, sat in a tall chair, his gaze stern but impartial. Lawyers' desks, piled high with files and papers, lined either side of the room, and behind them were faces Max and Lana knew all too well. Their colleagues, their advisors, and those who had come to watch the perfect couple crumble. Max Wolfs, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, sat next to his attorney, Elizabeth Crow, a woman with a streak of silver in her dark hair and a reputation for making opponents tremble. He'd hired her for her toughness and her ability to turn doubt into ironclad arguments. Across the table from him, at the defendant's table, sat Lana, her dark hair pulled back into an elegant bun, her dark green dress accentuating her understated grace. Beside her sat her attorney, David Rains, an old friend of Lana's from college. His reputation was equally formidable. He was known for being able to crush an opponent with a single well-placed question. Max knew Lana wouldn't pick a weak defense attorney, but he still underestimated how far she was willing to go. The judge rapped his gavel, and the courtroom fell silent. His voice, deep and melodic, echoed throughout the room. Case No. 459, Wolfs v. Scott. Plaintiff, state your position. Elizabeth Crow stood, her movements as precise as a surgeon's. She nodded at Max, and he stood, his heart pounding in his chest. He was used to arguing in court, but this was different. This wasn't another corporate dispute, this was his life, his marriage, his future. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice even, like a lawyer and not a wronged husband. Your Honor, he began, his voice firm but his insides seething. Under the terms of our prenuptial agreement, which we both signed, my wife, Lana Scott, violated the adultery clause. Based on that, I seek a divorce and full distribution of our marital property in my favor. He paused, feeling all eyes in the courtroom on him. I have a medical certificate confirming that I have a sexually transmitted infection. Chlamydia. I have had no intercourse outside of marriage, which points to my wife's guilt. He paused, handing the floor over to Elizabeth. She continued, her voice cold and confident. Your Honor, we present a medical certificate confirming the plaintiff's diagnosis. In addition, we have preliminary information from a private investigator indicating suspicious behavior by the defendant, including late calls and meetings with unknown persons. We demand full compliance with the terms of the contract. The judge nodded, his face unreadable. He looked at Lana and her lawyer. Defendant, what is your position? Lana stood up, her movements fluid, but there was a fire in her eyes. She looked at the judge, then at Max, and her voice, when she spoke, was clear, almost defiant. Your Honor, she began, her tone calm, but with just the slightest hint of sarcasm. I categorically deny the accusations of adultery. My husband, Max Wolfs, bases his case on speculation, not fact. His medical report only confirms his own diagnosis, not my guilt. Furthermore, I have been tested myself, and the results show that I have the infection, but in a latent form, indicating that I could have been infected by him. She paused, letting the words settle in the courtroom. I demand a full medical examination and digital trace analysis to determine who was the source of the infection and when, and I am confident that the truth will be on my side. Her lawyer, David Rains, stood up, his smile thin, but with the confidence of a predator ready to pounce. Your Honor, we ask the court to order independent medical examinations for both parties. In addition, we request an analysis of digital data phone calls, text messages, geolocation to establish a chronology of events. My client is not only innocent, but she is the victim of baseless accusations that are destroying her reputation and her marriage. Max felt his confidence waver. Lana seemed too calm, too confident. Her demand to retake the tests and check the digital traces was an unexpected move, but he couldn't back down. He nodded to Elizabeth, who continued. We agree to the examination, Your Honor, but we also insist that the court consider the defendant's behavior. Her frequent business trips, late meetings, and evasive answers speak for themselves. The judge raised his hand, calling for silence. I appoint an independent medical examination for both parties. I also ask that all digital data that may be relevant to the case be provided. The hearing is adjourned for 2 weeks. He rapped the gavel, and the room filled with rustling. Sure. Below is an extended excerpt from the post-meeting scene with a tense exchange between Max and Lana. I kept the cold confrontational tone and added a verbal duel where everyone tries to assert their rightness and gain an advantage. After the meeting, Max went outside, feeling the cold March air bite his face, getting under the collar of his coat. Journalists were already crowding around. Camera flashes, shouts, microphones stretched through the wind. Mr. Wolf, is it true that you filed for divorce because of infidelity? Who was the initiator? What do you think about your wife's position? Max put on his sunglasses, didn't answer any questions, and walked quickly to the taxi stand. His head was ringing. Everything was mixed up: the courtroom, the judge's voice, the papers, the looks. He hadn't expected Lana to be so cold, cool, prepared. She wasn't defending herself, she was attacking. Her demand for an independent medical examination, her challenge to the legality of the evidence collection, all of it had been a blow to the point he had discovered. An hour later, they found themselves in a conference room without lawyers, without cameras, just the two of them, face to face, and suddenly silence. That same, deafening silence like before a storm. You got your way, Lana spoke first, standing by the window, her arms crossed, her gaze directed somewhere into the gray horizon of Manhattan. The trial, the shame, the headlines. Now everyone knows that Max Wolfs is not just a lawyer, but a man who can't trust his own wife. I seek the truth, he said harshly. You could have told me. You could have at least explained when I found the certificate. I learned about the diagnosis from you. She turned sharply, and from that moment on you became not a husband to me, but an accuser. You didn't try to understand, you looked for someone to blame. Max stepped closer and placed a copy of the contract on the table. We both know that if the terms are proven to be violated, I get everything. The apartment, the bills, even your gallery. You signed this voluntarily. Lana came closer, looking straight into the eyes. Yes, and you seem to have forgotten that I'm not just a wife, but a fighter too. I won't give you anything without a fight, Max, even if you drag the entire New York court into it. Do you think this is about money? He said in a strangled voice. It's about trust, about what was destroyed when you refused to be honest. When did I refuse to obey? Her voice became quiet, but there was a threat in it. Did I betray you, or did I just stop playing by your rules? He fell silent, clenched his fists. Lana leaned towards him, almost whispering. Are you still sure it was me? Are you sure that that night at the bar with Gayla wasn't a betrayal just because you didn't touch her? Max winced. Her words hit him right where he didn't want to see weakness. You can't prove it. And you, a fire flashed in her eyes. Can you prove your innocence? There was silence. Deaf, dense, as if the walls had shrunk. Finally, Max said quietly, we both lost, Lana. We just haven't decided who will be the first to admit it. She straightened up and smiled coldly. I don't lose, especially not to you. And she left, slamming the door. And in the room, there were only papers, memories, and 2 destroyed worlds, no longer connected by anything except the war for what used to be called love. Ray Carter, a private detective, was waiting for him in the office with a new report. You were right, Max, Ray said, handing over the folder. I found something else. Lana met the same man at the bar again. Longer this time, and they left together. I can't say what happened, but it doesn't look like a business meeting. Max opened the folder, his eyes scanning the photographs. Lana, in a black coat, was leaving the bar on the arm of a tall man. His face was still blurry, but Lana's gestures, her slight smile, her lean toward him felt too intimate. That's all? Max asked, his voice hoarse. For now, yes, Ray replied. But I'm digging further. If there's something there, I'll find it. Max nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He remembered the night in Halifax, Gala, her laugh, her ring. He tried to push the memories away, but they kept coming back like ghosts. If Lana was right, if she had caught the disease from him, then everything he did would come back to haunt him. But he couldn't stop himself. He was too far gone. Meanwhile, Lana was sitting in the office of David Raines, her lawyer. They were drinking coffee, and David was leaning over the table, studying documents. "Are you sure you want to go all the way?" he asked, looking at her over his glasses. "This is going to be messy, Lana. Max won't give in." "I know," she said, her voice calm but steely. "But I won't let him destroy me. He thinks he's got me, but he's wrong." David smiled, but his eyes remained serious. "We found a witness," he said. "A woman who was at that conference in Halifax. She claims she saw Max with another woman. Name, Gala. That could be our ticket." Lana nodded, her face showing no emotion. "Okay, but I want it to be ironclad. No assumptions, just facts." "Facts are my job," David said, echoing the words Max had heard his detective use. "But Lana, are you sure you're ready for what we're going to find?" She looked at him. Her eyes were cold, but there was a shadow of pain in them. "I'm ready, David. I've always been ready." The second court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. The medical examination confirmed the results. Max had active chlamydia. Lana had latent chlamydia. This meant that Lana could have been infected later, but did not rule out her guilt. Digital traces, calls, messages, geolocation were submitted to the court, but they were ambiguous. Lana's phone showed several calls from an unknown number, but no clear evidence of infidelity. Max discovered that his own data, in particular, correspondence with Gala, had been partially deleted, but was restored by experts. This was a blow. His lawyer, Elizabeth, warned that this could weaken his position. In the courtroom, Lana called a witness, a woman named Sarah, a business associate who had attended the conference in Halifax. Sarah, a young woman with short blonde hair and a confident look, spoke clearly. "I saw Max Wolfs at a bar with a woman named Gala. They were close, too close for a business meeting. He mentioned her name in conversation and said she was special." Max felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at Lana, but her face remained impassive. Elizabeth leaned toward him and whispered, "This doesn't prove anything. We can dispute it." But Max knew that this was only the beginning. The court demanded more evidence, more examinations, more truth. And with each passing day, he became more and more afraid that the truth he was looking for would destroy not only Lana, but himself as well. The Manhattan courtroom was an arena where truth and lies battled equally, and the silence between the lawyers' arguments seemed heavier than any words. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished wood of the tables, which were piled high with folders of documents. The judge, a gray-haired man with a piercing gaze, sat in his seat, his fingers tapping the gavel as if counting down the time until the next turn in this tangled case. Max Wolfs, dressed in a dark gray suit, sat next to his lawyer, Elizabeth Crowe, whose face remained impassive despite the storm brewing in the courtroom. Across the room, Lana Scott, in a sharp black suit, looked calm, but her eyes were blazing with determination. Her lawyer, David Raines, an old friend and master of legal chess, held a thin folder that was soon revealed to be loaded with dynamite. Max was sure that today would be his day of triumph. That morning, Ray Carter, his private investigator, had sent a report that Max believed was his trump card. Ray had dug up old correspondence between Lana and a man, dating back several months to their wedding. The messages were explicit, full of hints of intimacy, and although they did not prove infidelity during the marriage, Max saw in them a crack in her image of the perfect wife. He clutched the file in his hands, feeling his confidence returning. If he could prove that Lana had been unfaithful before their marriage, it would undermine her defense, her moral authority in court. He could already imagine the judge declaring him the winner, the assets, their penthouse, Lana's gallery, their joint accounts passing to him. But somewhere in the back of his mind, like a shadow, There was a thought of Gala, of that night in Halifax, of the ring he had given her. He pushed the memories away, but they returned like ghosts, reminding him that his own truth might not be so pure. The judge rapped his gavel, and the room fell silent. Case No. 459, Wolfs v. Scott, he announced, his voice level but authoritative. We will proceed with the trial. Plaintiff, present any new evidence. Elizabeth Crowe stood up, her movements precise, like a dancer preparing for a decisive step. Your Honor, she began, her voice cool and confident, we present new evidence that demonstrates the defendant's unreliability. We have correspondence dating from before the marriage that indicates Miss Scott was romantically involved with another man. While this evidence does not directly relate to the marriage, it does demonstrate the defendant's tendency to conceal the truth, which casts doubt on her claims of innocence. Elizabeth handed copies of the correspondence to the judge and Lana's lawyer. Max looked at Lana, expecting to see panic, confusion, anything but what he saw. Her face remained calm, almost impassive, but the corners of her lips twitched slightly, as if she were holding back a smile. It threw him off. He expected her to be defensive, to justify herself, but instead she looked confident. The judge looked over the documents, his brows furrowing slightly. Mr. Raines, your reaction? He asked, turning his gaze to Lana's lawyer. David Raines stood up, his smile thin but menacing. Your Honor, these correspondences are irrelevant. They are dated before the marriage and do not prove a breach of contract. My client is prepared to present her evidence, which I am confident will change the course of this case. Lana stood up, her movements fluid, but with a steely determination. She looked at the judge, then at Max, and her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but piercing, like a cold wind. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, she began, her tone measured but forceful. My husband accuses me of adultery based on a medical diagnosis and his own assumptions. But the truth, as we know, is rarely obvious. Today, I wish to reveal another aspect of our marriage and our contract. She paused, removing a thin folder from her bag. That contract, which my husband is so fond of quoting, was signed with mutual understanding. The fidelity clause applies to both parties, no exceptions, and I intend to prove that it was Max Wolfs who violated that clause long before he began accusing me. The courtroom froze. Max felt his heart skip a beat. He looked at Elizabeth, but her face remained impassive. Lana handed copies of the documents to the judge and the lawyers, continuing to speak. I have evidence that Max cheated on me 2 years ago. Correspondence with a woman named Gala that began during his trip to Halifax. Messages he tried to delete were recovered by our experts. Geolocation data confirming his stay at the hotel with this woman. And most importantly, medical records that show Max may have had chlamydia back. Then he just never got tested to find out. Max felt the blood drain from his face. The courtroom seemed to spin around him. He looked at Lana, her calm face, her confident gaze, and he knew she wasn't bluffing. She knew. She knew all along. He remembered the night in Halifax, his conversations with Gala, her laughter, her question. You don't regret anything, do you? He had laughed then, thinking it would remain a secret. But now it was out like poison, poisoning everything he had built. The judge took the documents, his eyes running over the lines. Miss Scott, these are serious allegations, he said, his voice level but wary. Are you saying your husband violated the contract 2 years ago? Yes, Your Honor, Lana replied, her voice soft but steely. I found out shortly after his trip, but I decided to stay because I believed our marriage could be saved. I signed the contract, understanding every word of it. But now that Max is accusing me, I'm forced to reveal the truth. He's not a victim, he's a culprit. Elizabeth Crowe jumped up, her voice sharp. Your Honor, this is a distraction. This evidence is not confirmed. We require time to verify its authenticity. The judge nodded, his gaze heavy. I give the parties 3 days to review the new evidence. I also demand that they provide additional medical data that could clarify the chronology of the infection. The hearing is adjourned. Max sat as if stunned. He looked at Lana, But she did not return his gaze. Her face was inscrutable, but a shadow of pain flashed in her eyes. She left the hall. Her steps were light, almost weightless, but Max felt them reverberate in his chest like hammer blows. After the meeting, Max returned to his office, but work was not going well. He sat at his desk, looking at the folder of correspondence that Lana had provided. Messages with Gayla that he thought he had deleted forever. Photos of him and Gayla leaving a bar, his hand on her waist. Geolocation data confirming that he had spent the night in her room. All of it had been restored, as if someone had deliberately dug into his past. And he knew who. Lana. She was always one step ahead. Max felt everything inside him boiling. His heart was beating as if it was being pushed to the edge. He stood at the window of his office, looking out onto the street where cars were flowing in the light of their headlights, not knowing or guessing that in this tower someone else's life was collapsing. He grabbed his phone and quickly dialed Ray's number. Ray answered right away, calmly, as always. "Ray," Max began, but then his voice broke. "How did you miss this? You should have checked everything. Not just Lana, my correspondence, my data, everything." There was a brief pause on the other end. Ray spoke with his usual calm. "Max, you gave me your instructions. You said everything about Lana. You didn't ask me to dig into your past. I acted on your terms. You should have known," he shouted, his hand shaking as did his voice. "You know how these things work. You've seen what she does. She turns everything upside down. Max." Ray exhaled, and for the first time his voice became a little harsher. "If you don't control your own mistakes, don't expect someone else to do it for you. I looked for the enemy outside because you told me he was there, but it seemed he was closer." Max didn't answer. He just clenched his teeth and threw the phone aside, hearing it bounce off the glass table. There was only a hum in his chest, like a building struck by lightning. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, in an office overlooking a park, Lana sat in a chair with a glass of red wine. David Rain's office was minimalist luxury, dark wood, metal, large windows, a coziness that concealed a ruthless strategy. David leaned back in his leather chair, looking at Lana like a piece on a chessboard that had just made a bold move. "You played brilliantly," he said with a slight, almost lazy smile. "But this is not the end. Max will not give up. He will fight to the end." Lana looked at him calmly. Her eyes were tired, but there was strength in them, not ostentatious, but hard-won. "I know," she answered. "But I was tired of pretending. Tired of being who he wanted me to be. He thought he could destroy me on paper, in a contract in court." She took a sip of wine, but he was wrong. David nodded, resting his chin on his fingers. "These correspondences with Gayla are a strong move. Her messages, double meanings, late responses, this can be presented as emotional betrayal. This is enough for the court to doubt his purity, but we can go further. If we can prove that he infected you, and not the other way around," he continued, "we'll have a moral advantage. The contract can be turned in your favor. Besides, the press is already on our side. Gallery owner versus tyrant. Sounds like a headline, doesn't it?" Lana looked out the window. Manhattan shimmered like hundreds of eyes watching their game. "I always knew, David," she said quietly, "from the beginning. When he wrote that contract, when he said, 'It's fair for both of us,' I knew he was ready for war. But I waited, and now I'm ready." She turned to him, her voice challenging. "Let's push it. If he wants a fight, he'll get it." 3 days later, the trial resumed. The atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Cameras in the corridors, journalists whispering, guards at the door. This was no longer a private trial. It had become a spectacle where every gesture, every glance could end up in the tabloids, and no one knew how the final act would end. The medical examination sounded like a gong. Dr. Hirsch, the court's expert, read the report in a calm, academic voice. "Research has shown that Mr. Wolf's may have been infected for a period of 1 to 2 years, possibly asymptomatic until the infection flared up. The Scot shows signs of recent infection, likely from the same strain as the plaintiff. This conclusion was like a sentence, and silence reigned in the hall for a few seconds. Then came the second blow. The court was presented with reconstructed digital messages between Max and Gayla. Soft phrases, ambiguous emojis, promises to meet, flirting that could not go unnoticed. The last message from Gayla read, "You know, if it weren't for the circumstances, we could." Elizabeth Crowe, sitting next to Max, kept a calm demeanor, but even she couldn't hide the subtle tightening of her lips. She stood up. "Your Honor, the correspondence submitted by the defendant is emotional, but not physical. We will also submit emails from Miss Scott dating back to before the marriage, in which she discusses possible liaisons with third parties. This casts doubt on her reputation as a contract partner." The judge, a man with a cold, tired look, raised his eyebrows. "We are looking at a breach of the terms established at the time of marriage. The communications you present are dated before the contract was signed. However, the defendant's evidence contains a possible chronology of infidelities beginning long before their divorce and involving different people." And then Lana stood up, unhurriedly, confidently. She was wearing a simple dark dress, emphasizing the severity of her mood. She handed the judge a new folder. "Your Honor, I present the affidavit of my colleague, Mr. Harrison, who accompanied us to the conference in Chicago a year ago. He personally saw Mr. Wolfs at a bar in the company of a woman whose name we have not been able to establish, but who was certainly not Miss Gayla. We are not alleging adultery, we are merely demonstrating a pattern of behavior." Max felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't remember that night, not the woman's face, not the conversation. Just fragments. The noise of the bar, the alcohol, a stranger's hand on his shoulder. The judge leafed through the papers, his brows furrowing more and more. The evidence presented by the defendant points to a possible breach of contract by the plaintiff. I require further evidence to establish the exact chronology of events. The hearing is adjourned until Monday. The sound of a hammer. Whispers, flashes, movement in the hall. Max remained seated. For the first time in all this time, he did not immediately stand up. He looked at Lana, sitting across from him, and for the first time he saw not just the woman he loved, or his opponent in court. He saw strength, calculation, cold, ruthless determination. She knew everything, from the very beginning, and she waited. Lana met his gaze. Her eyes were not angry, they were clear, calm. "You built this contract yourself, Max," they read. "Now live by his rules." He looked away, because he realized he wasn't just losing, he was losing power, for the first time, and perhaps forever. Of course, here's an updated and expanded version of the scene with a different opening, more cinematic, full of atmosphere, tension, and dramatic rhythm. I kept the basic structure and essence, but enhanced the style, added nuances to make the storytelling even deeper and more intense. The morning over Manhattan was clear, almost deceptively calm. Smoke hung over the rooftops. The air was still cool, but already filled with the restlessness of spring. The city was alive with its own life, making noise, honking, making plans. But in one particular building, with a marble facade and high arches, on the top floor, in the courtroom, time seemed to stand still. Where dry legal formulas and business negotiations usually sounded, now there was a heavy silence, the silence before the denouement. The smell of old wood, paper, coffee, and tension hung in the air. Sunbeams broke through the high windows, falling on the floor like spotlights, snatching faces, movements, glances from the semi-darkness. This wasn't just another hearing. This was the final act. The arena, the reckoning. The courtroom was nearly full. Several journalists from leading publications sat with clipboards and notepads, pretending to watch, but their eyes were alight with anticipation of the scandal. The divorce of Max Wolf and Lana Scott had long ceased to be a personal tragedy. It had become a city story that fed headlines, talk shows, and the evening news. In the center of the hall, there are two tables, two worlds. On one side was Max Wolf's, in an impeccably tailored navy suit, with a perfectly knotted tie and an upright posture. But beneath that composed exterior was no longer confidence, only a desperate attempt to maintain control. On the other hand, there was Lana, collected, calm, almost frighteningly poised. Her dark hair was pulled back into a strict bun. Her gray-blue dress emphasized the line of her shoulders, and in her eyes there was no fatigue, no anger, no pain. There was only a cold, unwavering determination in her gaze. Like a chess player who knows that his opponent has already lost, he just hasn't realized it yet. The judge, a heavy-chinned, gray-haired man with a keen gaze, sat on his dais. He was silent, but his fingers, tapping the table almost imperceptibly, said more than his words. Like a conductor about to play his last chord, he sensed that the moment was near. On the table in front of Lana lay a thin folder. David Rains, her lawyer, held it between two fingers, almost casually, but Max knew that inside were more than just papers. Inside were everything he was afraid to see: his past, his weakness, his end as a strategist. He still hoped he had one trump card left: Lana's correspondence with her former lover, dating from before the marriage. He thought it would be enough to undermine her reputation, to make her appear fickle, insincere. He thought he could turn the tide of the case, if not legally, then morally. But now, sitting across from her, feeling himself losing more and more with every passing second, he realized he had made a mistake, not just in tactics, in his understanding of who he was up against. Lana didn't defend herself. She waited. She didn't back down. She built it. And when David Rains slowly laid out the papers on the table and looked up at the judge, Max suddenly caught his breath. Because he realized the fight was already over. Only they hadn't told him the score yet. And Lana had already seen him collapse. And perhaps that was her real victory. The judge rapped his gavel and the room fell silent. Case No. 459, Wolfs v. Scott, he announced, his voice deep and authoritative. We will proceed with the trial. Defendant, present your closing arguments. David Rains stood up, his movements confident, almost theatrical. Your Honor, he began, his voice level, but with a hidden power. My client, Lana Scott, has been accused of breach of marriage, but the evidence we have presented shows that it is the plaintiff, Max Wolfs, who is guilty of adultery. We have presented correspondence, geolocation data, and witness testimony confirming his affair with a woman named Gayla 2 years ago. Moreover, a medical examiner has determined that Mr. Wolfs may have had latent chlamydia back then, making him the source of the infection, not my client. But today we wish to disclose one more detail that will finally clarify the situation. Lana stood up, her movements fluid but with a steely determination. She looked at the judge, then at Max, and her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but piercing, like a cold wind on a winter night. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, she began, her tone measured but powerful. I knew about my husband's infidelity from the start. 2 years ago, after he went to Halifax, I discovered the messages he'd tried to hide. I could have fought back, I could have left, but I chose to stay. Not because I forgave him, but because I wanted to be prepared. She paused, her eyes meeting Max's, a hint of pain mixed with triumph. I knew our prenuptial agreement was more than just a document. It was an agreement based on mutual responsibility. The fidelity clause applied to both of us. And I knew that if Max broke it, he would lose everything. So I waited. I gathered evidence. And when he accused me, I was ready. The room froze. Max felt his heart squeeze. He looked at Lana, her calm face, her confident gaze, and he knew she wasn't just defending herself. She was playing a game he'd started, but one she'd mastered. He remembered checking her phone, hiring a detective, being sure he'd caught her. But all along, she knew. She'd been waiting for her moment. Lana continued, her voice a little louder, but still coldly clear. I won't deny that I had a relationship after I found out he cheated on me. Yes, I dated a man. She paused, letting the words sink in. That was after Halifax, after I realized my marriage was built on a lie. I didn't do it out of passion, but out of a desire to even the playing field. If Max thought he could break the contract and get away with it, I wanted to show him he was wrong. But I never hid it from my lawyers. I was prepared for it to come out, and I knew my truth was stronger. The judge frowned, his gaze heavy. Miss Scott, do you claim that you acted knowingly, knowing of your husband's infidelity? He asked, his voice even but wary. Yes, Your Honor, Lana replied, her voice soft but firm. I didn't forgive him. I bided my time, and when he filed suit against me, I knew it was time to show my hand. He thought he had me, but he was the one who fell into his own trap. Max felt his world crumble. He looked at Lana, at her calm face, at her eyes that seemed to see right through him, and he knew that everything he had done had been in vain. His own contract, his own rules, his own confidence, all of it had turned against him. He remembered signing that document, laughing at Lana's idea to include a fidelity clause. He had thought it was a formality then. Now he saw how that clause had become his death sentence. Elizabeth Crowe jumped up, her voice sharp, almost desperate. Your Honor, this is manipulation. The defendant admits her infidelity, which proves a breach of contract on her part. We demand that her evidence be dismissed as irrelevant. David Rains smiled, his eyes shining. Your Honor, my client does not deny her actions, but they were a response to the plaintiff's betrayal. Medical evidence confirms that Mr. Wolf's developed chlamydia before my client did. Her actions were provoked by his infidelity, making him the primary breach of contract. The judge raised his hand, calling for silence. I have heard both sides, he said, his voice heavy as lead. This case is taking an unexpected turn. I am adjourning for a closed conference. The parties will be called for the verdict. The courtroom was filled with a murmur as the judge and his panel left. Max sat still, his eyes glued to the table. He could feel his lawyer trying to speak, but her words were lost in the air. He looked at Lana, who was talking quietly to David, her face calm, almost serene. She had won, and he knew it. An hour later, the judge returned, his face impassive. He rapped his gavel, and the room fell silent again. Based on the evidence, he began, his voice level but authoritative, the court finds that the plaintiff, Max Wolfs, violated the adultery clause in the prenuptial agreement. The medical examination and digital evidence confirm that his infidelity preceded the defendant's actions. Miss Scott, as the injured party, retains 1/2 of the marital property. Moreover, under the terms of the contract, the assets, including the gallery and the real estate, are hers alone. The plaintiff is awarded the minimum consumer share required by New York state law. Max felt his chest tighten as if he were under a waterfall. He looked at the judge, but his words seemed distant, like an echo. Across from him, Lana smiled slightly, her eyes shining with suppressed triumph. David Rains shook her hand, his smile barely noticeable, but there was a sense of victory in it. The marriage is dissolved, the judge continued. The case is closed. Max stood up, his movements mechanical. He didn't look at Lana, didn't look at his lawyer. He simply walked out of the courtroom, each step pounding into his chest like a hammer blow. The cold Manhattan air greeted him outside, but he didn't notice it. He had lost everything, the penthouse, the money, the reputation. But the worst part was the realization that he had lost it not because of Lana, but because of himself. Lana remained in the courtroom, her lawyer quietly congratulating her, holding out a glass of water. She nodded, her smile light, almost imperceptible. She had won more than just a trial. She had won the truth, and perhaps revenge. Max returned to his office, but he no longer felt at home. His desk, piled high with papers, felt foreign. He opened the drawer where he kept old photographs him and Lana at their wedding, their first holiday in Italy, their smiles that had seemed genuine then. He looked at them, and a lump grew in his chest that he couldn't swallow. He thought he had her, that he was smarter, that he had the game under control. But Lana was one step ahead. She was always one step ahead. Later that evening, he received a text from Ray Carter. Sorry, Max. I didn't know she was digging that deep. Max didn't respond. He knew there was no point in blaming Ray. He only blamed himself. Lana, meanwhile, sat in her gallery office, looking out at the city lights. David Rains had left, leaving her alone. She held a glass of wine, her eyes fixed on something distant. She didn't feel the joy of victory. She felt empty. She'd known about his betrayal from the start, but she'd kept quiet because she believed she could save their marriage. But when he accused her, when he sued, she realized there was nothing to save. She'd chosen revenge, and now that it was over, she wasn't sure if it had been worth it. The streets of Manhattan, bathed in the cold light of the morning sun, seemed alien to Max, as if he were visiting this city he had once considered his own for the first time. He drove slowly, almost mechanically, stopping at a metal fence on the edge of the business district. The engine died, and in the silence that followed, he heard only the beating of his own heart, empty and rhythmic, like a metronome. His fingers, still clutching the steering wheel, were cold, and there was a growing emptiness in his chest that he could neither explain nor fill. The trial was over. Lana had gotten everything: the penthouse, the gallery, their joint accounts, their life. He had gotten only the pitiful share provided by law and the weight of humiliation that he now bore like a brand. He'd spent the night in a hotel the night before, unable to return to their luxurious mansion, which was now hers. Everything they'd once shared, the marble floors, the paintings on the walls, even the smell of coffee in the morning, felt like a scene from someone else's life, one he could no longer access. He stared at his phone, where an unread text from a colleague blinked. Contract canceled. You lost. He didn't respond. He simply closed his eyes, searching the darkness for some shred of who he'd been before. But there was only emptiness. He'd lost more than just property. He'd lost her trust, her love, and maybe even himself. Meanwhile, Lana stood on the courthouse steps, her coat slipping off her shoulders and tossing it over her arm, as if she were casting off the last shackles of the past. The fresh air touched her neck, and she inhaled deeply, feeling the gentle rush of freedom mingle with the bitter aftertaste of victory. Everything that was still there, she thought, looking around the square where the journalists were still milling about, shouting questions she had no intention of answering. This August, soaked in cynicism, lies, and pain, was coming to an end, and with it everything that connected her to Max. She had won, but the victory brought no joy, only a sense of restored justice, fragile as first ice. The verdict had been handed down the day before, and the words still echoed in both their minds. The judge, with his stern gaze and level voice, had summed it up. Both spouses had violated their prenuptial agreement, both had cheated, but Max had done it first. Medical reports, digital traces, witness testimony all pointed to his affair with Gayla in Halifax 2 years earlier as the trigger that had set off the chain of events. Lana, having learned of his betrayal, had not left, had not made a scene, but had begun collecting evidence, patiently, like a chess player waiting for the decisive move. Her own betrayal, she had admitted in court, had not been passion but calculation, an attempt to even the playing field, to show Max that he could not play by his own rules and get away with it. The fidelity clause was mutual, according to the contract, and whoever broke it first lost everything. Max, convinced he had Lana trapped, failed to take into account that she had known about his weaknesses from the start. The court awarded her everything: the Upper East Side penthouse, the gallery, the bank accounts, even the antique collection they had amassed together. Max received only the minimum share allowed by New York state law, an amount barely enough to pay the rent for a modest apartment. His reputation, so carefully built over the years, was in ruins. The tabloid headlines screamed, "Lawyer caught in his own trap," and his colleagues, who had once respected him, now looked away. Lana had emerged from the courtroom not just as a winner, but as a woman who had rewritten the rules of the game. She hadn't been looking for sympathy or triumph. Her goal had been to restore the balance that Max had tried to upset. And now, standing on the steps, she felt her mind at peace. She was free. Max sat in the car, looking out at a city that seemed foreign to him. He thought back to the early years with Lana, their laughter, their dreams, their plans. He remembered the way she looked at him when they signed the contract, her slight smile, her words, "It's just a formality, Max. We trust each other." He had laughed then, thinking that the document would never be needed. Now he realized that Lana had seen further than he had. She knew that trust was fragile, and she had a plan in place in case it was broken. He opened his phone and scrolled through his old messages. There were her warm words, her jokes, her plans for the future. But now they seemed like letters from another life. He wrote to her, "I'm sorry," but he didn't send it. He knew it wouldn't change anything. Lana wouldn't forgive. She wasn't one to go back to the past. He deleted the message and started the car, heading nowhere. His life, so orderly and successful, was now a blank page, and he didn't know how to fill it. Lana returned to her gallery, which now belonged only to her. The building, with its high ceilings and glass walls, was her refuge, her world. She walked through the halls where they were already preparing for a new exhibition. The title of the exhibition, written on the wall, read, "Contract." This series of works was her response to everything that had happened. Each painting told a story of trust that is built over years and betrayal that destroys it in an instant. One of the works depicted a torn document, the fragments of which dissolved into a dark background, as if disappearing into the void. Another showed two figures standing back to back, their silhouettes divided by a thin but insurmountable line. Lana put her pain, her anger, her victory into these works. But most of all, she put her truth into them. Meanwhile, Max stopped at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He ordered a coffee but didn't touch it, just watched the steam rise from the cup and dissolve into the air. He thought about Lana, about her words in court, about how she waited, how she gathered evidence, how she outmaneuvered him. He had always considered himself a master strategist, but now he realized that she was better. She saw his weaknesses, his mistakes, his lies, and she used them, not out of revenge, but out of a need to protect herself. He remembered their last night together, before it all started. They were having dinner in their penthouse, and Lana was laughing and talking about the new exhibition. He had looked at her then and thought that she would never know about Grok, about the other people, about his secrets. He had thought he could live a double life. Now he realized that this illusion had been his biggest mistake. His phone buzzed, a text from Elizabeth Crow, his lawyer. "We can appeal. There's a chance." Max shook his head. He knew an appeal wouldn't change anything. The evidence was too strong, the truth too obvious. He hadn't just lost the trial. He had lost himself. Lana stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by guests who had come to the opening. Journalists, collectors, friends, they all admired her work, her courage, her story. She smiled, answered questions, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about what would happen next. Her life, freed from Max, from his lies, from his control, was a blank slate. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could write whatever she wanted on it. As the guests began to leave, Lana was left alone in the gallery. She went to the window, looking out at the city that shimmered under the stars. Somewhere out there, in this vast world, was Max, but he was Max now, not part of her world, but he was no longer part of her history. Maybe one day, under the sound of the rain, she would hear his voice, hear him. But it would only be an echo, a reflex of the past that would not be able to touch her. She closed the gallery door, her steps light, confident. A new chapter of her life was beginning. No mistakes, no doubts, no betrayal, just her and her truth. The story has come to an end, but it is only the beginning. There are even more unexpected turns and exciting events ahead. Subscribe to stay up to date with what others can only guess. Like and comment are your connection to the author. See you soon. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.